Come on.
Run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them.
Welcome to the Week 2 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp. I'll be your host on this edition of the podcast, where we will be breaking down everything that happened in Week 1 of the NFL season. Week 1 was a very exciting week, a lot of competitive games. Obviously, it started out great and ended kind of poorly with that Minnesota Vikings performance against the San Francisco 49ers. If you fell asleep or turned that game off, we'll go over some of the key takeaways that you need to get from that game. But moving ahead, the way that we're going to break down every single one of these podcasts on Tuesdays is we're first going to start with some of the weekly headlines, some of the key takeaways, news items that I found from Week 1, the prior week. In this case, we're going to look at some of the key advanced metrics that won or lost games for some of these teams, high level. Then we're going to talk about some of the quarterback play, which quarterback struggled or excelled. Obviously, quarterback play is the most important position on the field in terms of deciding game outcomes typically. So it's very important to discuss where some of these quarterbacks are and how comfortable they looked in their current offenses. And then speaking of comfort level, we're going to dig into some of these coordinators, new coordinators all over the field, offensively and defensively for the NFL. A lot of guys in different places, a lot of guys in new roles, which guys performed well and which guys struggled because let's face it, they had their fingerprints all over these Week 1 games, and they're obviously going to be a big factor moving forward. Then we're going to dig into a very exciting segment that I call the rearview mirror segment. This is a segment that is devoted entirely to understanding deeper than the score and deeper than the box score, what made some of these teams win or lose their games. Look at some of the performance because the scoreboard doesn't necessarily indicate exactly how they performed out on the field. And what matters for us as number one, just fans of the game, but more importantly, trying to make money off of this game, whether it is from sports betting or daily fantasy. It's important to understand why teams won, why they lost, how they won, how they lost, what performances we should take away, maybe what performances we should discount. That's going to really help in terms of projecting Week 2 and beyond to gain a better understanding of these players. Next, we're going to dive into some of the key injuries, and then we're going to conclude the podcast. Typically, we will touch on some stats and charts, some of my advanced metrics, and display some of those for you, but we're going to skip that right now because we only have 1 week of data. It's really not all that reflective. I will touch on some of those metrics during the breakdowns of every single game, but with that said, let's jump right into the weekly headlines. I have one quick announcement before we jump into these headlines, and that is I'm extending an offer I gave out yesterday, and I'll extend it through till Wednesday morning, and that is free access to my client-only page at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So let's jump right into why I'm doing that. It's basically because every single recommendation that I give on games to clients gets tweeted out and posted on my records page after kickoff, so you can see exactly what I'm recommending. However, the write-ups and all the other information I share, including my Sunday morning phone call with Bill Krackomberger, a.k.a. Crackman, who's a professional bettor and legend out in Las Vegas, on Sunday morning, those are not available to you, nor is all the new daily fantasy stuff that I'm offering in terms of my information and subscription-related items there. So what I wanted to do is allow you this week, and this week only, free access to go ahead and check out what I did, even though these games already happened. So go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com, enter the username DEMO, D-E-M-O. The password is DEMO, D-E-M-O, and that will unlock what you see on the screen right now. It's basically every single one of the recommendations that I gave out. We ended up going 6-0 on the recommendations that had write-ups with them, which are over here on the left-hand side of the page. You can click on every single game and read the write-up, why I am recommending that particular wager. We did several unders on games, an over, which got really lucky on that New York Giants over, of course. That was complete luck. But most of these games very much on the total right side throughout the entire course of the game for the most part. There was a teaser that I added late. That's over on the right-hand side. That one lost. So my final record for sports betting recommendations for week 1 was 6-1. You can read everything there. Also encourage you to listen to the call with Bill Krakenberger, which was Sunday morning. I do that every single Sunday of the year, as long as he is not away from Vegas, which he lives out there. He's always out there. So usually that's not going to happen except in the summertime, that he's not going to be there. So we'll be able to get those calls most every single week. So you can listen to that. And then last but not least, the daily fantasy information that I'm providing. This is a information-only tool. I started doing it this season because so many of you guys are playing daily fantasy and were asking me about it. So what I have is a 3-part offering for $9 each week. First part is a PDF document. It's a 7-page document. You can go ahead and take a look at that. It's got tons of matchup analytics that are going to help us figure out where some players may have advantages this upcoming week. That comes out on Wednesdays early in the week. Then I've got a article that I post called Hits and Misses, basically touching on some players I think will over exceed their payment and their ranking in the fantasy sites, both FanDuel and DraftKings, as well as those players who I think might miss. And then I record a podcast as well, and I'm going to be bringing on guests throughout the season for that. So those are all offered. I don't provide lineups or anything like that. These are just recommendations. However, what I will say is that throughout the course of the season, I'm obviously playing daily fantasy as well, and I will share my lineups, things that I produced with those clients after the fact, so you guys can kind of take a look at how some of the recommendations may or may not have paid off. This particular week, I only entered four different tournaments. Most of them were 50-50, quintuple up, triple up, so where we were getting 5 times the entry fee, 3 times the entry fee. One of them was just a straight 50-50, and the other one I entered one of those millionaire makers, and in every single case I cashed. And on the Millionaire Maker, made about just over 100% on what I put in there. So in every single case, we did well with what we recommended for week 1. But again, those aren't lineups. We're not grading anything here. I'm just going to go ahead and share some of that information with you guys throughout the course of the year. That product is just to help you guys pick your lineups, be a little bit more intelligent about some decisions that you may be making. And here's one of the main reasons why that's important. I'm not encouraging people to play daily fantasy, but there's obviously a lot of you guys that are doing it, and you've asked me in the past for information, so that's why I'm providing it. But I just want to say this is a rant against the industry, even though, of course, it was a successful first week for me, and hopefully for the clients who were paying attention to some of those recommendations. These guys are totally trying to turn the entire NFL community into a bunch of degenerates with these commercials. Throughout the course of the games, every single commercial break has one of these daily fantasy commercials in there, and it's getting a bit obscene. It's clearly gambling. Wagering on daily fantasy, the best guys who are most intelligent, who are going to win the most, are guys probably not that much different than myself, with computer models and analytics. And guess what? That's the same thing that you utilize for successful sports betting, is you're utilizing a lot of different information like that to be able to be a professional sports bettor, as it is being a professional daily fantasy player. There's no difference at all. It's still a lot of luck that has to fall your way for you to win money playing these things. So it's still gambling, in my opinion. So the fact that that's legal and sports betting is a joke to me. I'm fine with it, but the problem is this: the fact that it is legal and these guys are allowed to advertise so much throughout the course of the games basically is turning a lot of people into thinking that they can get easy money playing this thing. And there's no discussion on any site anywhere about money management for daily fantasy. And that's my big concern for people in this industry who are trying to get involved and want to try to play a little bit. Is it's very addictive, it's very degenerative, and it's going to get people to lose a lot of money who maybe don't know what they're doing because they think it's fun, they think it's fantasy football, they don't really think it's going to be a problem. It's so easy to deposit on these sites, it's so easy to create new lineups and play, that people are just going to be losing money to guys who have a bit more analytics background and a bit better edge. So I just really caution anybody who is playing, even if you're using my recommendations that come from all of my analytics and having success, or if you're playing on your own, just use smart money management. This is no different than betting on sports. You have to use proper money management or your bankroll is going to be gone quickly, and then hopefully you don't wind up like a lot of people do who end up going beyond their means to try to put money in there and end up causing personal problems for themselves and their families and that sort of thing. So just a very quick reminder to you guys, use smart money management. This still is gambling, and you guys need to use smart money management moving forward. Let's jump right into story number 1, key metrics in winning games. If you guys are familiar with my 2015 football preview, that 340-page preview that I did before the season, you can get it if you haven't gotten it already. It's available at Amazon.com or on my website. But I went over some of the critical and game-deciding statistics at a high level. First and foremost was turnover battle. Teams that win the turnover battle typically win 79% of their games. Teams that have more return touchdowns, whether it's kickoff return, punt return, or defensive returns, interceptions or fumbles, those teams with more return touchdowns than their opponents win 75% of those games. And teams who are able to pressure the quarterback and record more sacks historically have won 71% of their games. So I tracked those for all the teams last year. Obviously, we're going to be tracking those moving forward into the season because they're very critical in terms of determining outcomes of these games. But let's flash up here a key graphic because there's another key metric that I invented and introduced a couple years ago called early down success rate. Now, if you're catching this podcast on iTunes, then you're not going to see this graphic, but I'll go ahead and describe everything so you're not going to miss it. If you're watching this on YouTube, on the website, or on my YouTube channel, you'll obviously be able to see all the graphics that I incorporate into this podcast. Try to give you guys some visuals to help you get a better appreciation and understanding for some of the things that we're discussing on here. But at any rate, on this graphic, I display those key metrics in winning games, the 4 of those. The last one I touched on just a second ago, early down success rate. That is a custom analytic I invented a couple of years ago based on a bunch of research that I did in terms of efficiency and winning games. What early down success rate measures is how often, when on offense, a team is able to bypass third down by converting first downs on first or second down, not forcing themselves into third down, and defensively forcing the opponent into third downs with more regularity. That is a very efficient metric, and it's very much predictive in terms of determining game outcomes, as well as correlates extremely well to victory. So let's see how it correlated in week 1 to victory. First of all, teams with fewer turnovers. Again, these teams should be winning their games at a high rate. They went 7-3, won 70% of their games this weekend. Teams who had more turnovers than their opponents but still won included the St. Louis Rams against the Seattle Seahawks. The San Diego Chargers had more turnovers than the Detroit Lions, and the Dallas Cowboys had more turnovers than the New York Giants, but those 3 teams did end up winning their games anyways. More non-offensive touchdowns. Those teams, again, should be winning their games more often, but this past week, those teams only went 3-3. There were 3 teams who allowed more non-offensive touchdowns to their opponent, but still won the games. And it's actually those same 3 teams that I just mentioned. St. Louis Rams, San Diego Chargers, and Dallas Cowboys gave up more non-offensive touchdowns to their opponent, but won their games. We'll get into this later when we go over the rearview mirror segment, but this does not bode extremely well for those opponents. The Seattle Seahawks, the Detroit Lions, and the New York Giants. Teams who recorded more sacks than their opponent this past week went 12-4. They won 75% of their games. Those teams include those teams who won games despite allowing more sacks to the other team include the Miami Dolphins to the Washington Redskins, the San Diego Chargers to the Detroit Lions. The Denver Broncos gave up more sacks to the Baltimore Ravens, and the Atlanta Falcons last night, Monday night, gave up more sacks to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now the Dolphins, I'll touch on that one for a second because that's a team that had a rebuilt defense with Ndamukong Suh. A lot of talk about trying to generate more pass pressure on the opponent. They're going up against the Washington Redskins, who don't really have a great offensive line. And the Redskins defense obviously has had its share of problems over the years, but as I mentioned, declines. That Washington Redskins defense has improved. They're a pretty formidable unit right now, primarily up front. And they actually recorded more sacks. They had 3 sacks, and the Dolphins only got 1. But last but not least, better early down success rate. Again, this is that custom analytic I invented. 13-3 if you had a better early down success rate. That's 81% wins. That's obviously the most of these key metrics that we're tracking here. But I do want to call attention to 3 teams that won their games despite allowing a better early down success rate to their opponents, include the Carolina Panthers, the Buffalo Bills, and the Atlanta Falcons. If you're catching this on YouTube, you can see I've highlighted the Bills and the Falcons in red. Those 2 teams should kind of almost be classified by themselves to an extent. I'm not going to reduce the record to 13-1, but definitely call those 2 teams out because both were up by 17 points at halftime. Big halftime leads, and typically when a team is up big at halftime, in the second half, particularly the fourth quarter, they are not as concerned with trying to maintain their efficiency. They're trying to run out the clock, and so they don't mind getting into third down and spending an extra 40 seconds trying to convert a first down. So a little bit less aggressive offensively in terms of throwing the ball and trying to generate big chunk plays there in the second half from both of those teams, but they still fall in here. So the team to really draw your attention to who won their game but gave up a better early down success rate to their opponent, the only real team I want to highlight is the Carolina Panthers. They gave up a better early down success rate to the Jacksonville Jaguars, so that's a concern for the Panthers. Now, a couple key takeaways from this before we move on to the next story. Number 1, the Seattle Seahawks. Red flags abound with this team right now. Since 2005, teams who scored 2 non-offensive touchdowns, those are return touchdowns, and were at least +2 in turnover margin, which Seattle was in this game, had been 56-0. 100% wins, never had lost, and 55-1 against the spread, so long as they were not underdogs of over 2 points. So if a team's a favorite in the game, a pick, very short dog, these teams have never lost if they're getting 2 touchdowns from their return groups as well as +2 in turnover margin. But Seattle became that first team since 2005, over 10 years, to actually lose that game. So that's a big deal. And then when you look at teams that won the turnover battle and scored more return touchdowns, those were the Seattle Seahawks, the Detroit Lions, and the New York Giants. All 3 of those teams won the turnover battle and scored more return touchdowns. Again, since 2005, those teams had won 89% of their games and basically covered the same percentage, yet all 3 of those teams lost. So again, some red flags for those teams. Story number 2, we're going to touch on key quarterback performance, and in particular, one of the metrics I want to talk about first is play action. Play action is very important in the NFL. It obviously helps disguise things. It gives the defense a pause for a second that'll give your receivers an advantage. And it usually, obviously, will work better if you can establish a bit of a ground game before starting to use it. However, across the NFL, when using play action, on average, your quarterback rating will increase by approximately 10 points. Certain teams use it far more frequently than other teams, and certain teams get better results than other teams. One of the teams that I want to touch on real briefly is the Philadelphia Eagles. Under Chip Kelly, this was a team that was using it in close to 30% of their overall passing plays in 2013 and again in 2014. So this was it was actually the second most of any team in terms of on their pass plays using it. The Seattle Seahawks was actually slightly above them in terms of their percentages. But the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the reasons I thought that Sam Bradford would have an excellent chance to excel in 2015 in Philadelphia is because of how frequently he uses it with Chip Kelly versus how infrequently he was using it in St. Louis. Well, Week 1, obviously you're not going to overreact to one game, but the Philadelphia Eagles only ran play action on 15% of their snaps. Obviously the NFL average, just so you know, is 20%, and so they were far below the NFL average. And as you can see on this graphic that I've produced here, if you're watching this on YouTube, they were a team, I've ordered this by percentage of passes that were used with play action. They were 25th in the NFL in terms of frequency of using play action with Sam Bradford. So very low numbers, and he didn't perform exceedingly well with or without play action, to be honest with you. But had they established a little bit more of a ground game and then could have used some play action more, that would have helped him tremendously. So I'm really hoping, for efficiency's sake, for watching the NFL, that Chip Kelly uses more play action, even if they're not going to call run plays. But of course, the Atlanta Falcons were in that backfield a lot. Obviously, it wasn't a perfectly executed game from the offensive line in terms of blocking, so it made things more difficult to call play action, which obviously takes a little bit longer to execute rather than the quick passing that Sam Bradford was doing most of the second half. Very short routes, but very quick out of his hand. But if you look at this graphic, you can clearly see that a lot of the quarterbacks that struggled were not using play action very much. Take a look at the team who used it the most over the last couple of years, the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson and Seattle Seahawks used it the least of any starting quarterback in the NFL. He ran it only 9.4% of all of his pass plays. They were averaging 3.9 yards per rush, so not that effective, but not terrible. That was still 18th out of 32 teams this week. They just did not use very much play action. Once again, the St. Louis Rams defense was in their backfield often, so it was harder to take more time and more seconds on that clock to use that play action fake for Russell Wilson. So both teams need to get their offensive line in better shape to be able to use it more. But when you're looking at this graphic, you can clearly see teams that used it more. I will go into one example real quick. The guys who used it at the top, take a look at Alex Smith. The Kansas City Chiefs, that offensive line wasn't all that great. It was obviously a question mark coming into the season, going up against this formidable Houston Texans defensive line, J.J. Watt, and adding Vincent Wilfork. But the head coach still called play action on 35% of those passing plays, and you can see the difference it made for Alex Smith. When Andy Reid called play action, Alex Smith had a 148 passer rating. Without play action, it was down to a 93 rating. So he used it third most of any quarterback this past week and had great results. Some of the other quarterbacks, even Nick Foles, they went up against the Seattle Seahawks defensive line, but Nick Foles used it 35.5% of the time with good success against the Seattle Seahawks. And another couple quarterbacks I'll call your attention to, Andy Dalton, Marcus Mariota, and Phillip Rivers, all used play action significantly. All those teams won their games pretty handedly, except for the San Diego Chargers, which I'm going to touch on that game in a minute. But those guys were tremendous with play action. Then some quarterbacks that struggled, obviously, and who were not using play action much. Andrew Luck, Blake Bortles, Johnny Manziel, the aforementioned Russell Wilson, Jay Cutler, and even Peyton Manning. These are quarterbacks they did not use very much play action. All of them struggled. All of their teams lost their games. So certainly it's very important to have that aspect of the game in there, and these teams just did not do it. Next up, we're going to touch very briefly on quarterback performance as it relates to time in the pocket. As you can see on this next graphic, if you're watching in YouTube, this chart is organized by average time in the pocket to throw the football by quarterback. So the guys that had more time to throw in the pocket, who waited longer to make their passes, are at the top of this chart. The guys who got the ball out of their hands quicker are at the bottom of this chart. And it's a key aspect, a key thing to realize in the NFL. A couple points. Number one, obviously, if you're throwing deeper routes, you need to take more time in the pocket, so you're going to need pass protection. But more time in the pocket does not always translate to better performance from that offensive line and better performance in the passing game. As we can clearly see, some of these guys at the bottom of this list who are consistently getting the ball out of their hands very quickly within like 2.3 seconds on the play clock. Tom Brady was the fastest. They won their game. Phillip Rivers, Marcus Mariota, Sam Bradford obviously did not win, Andy Dalton, and even Ryan Fitzpatrick. These guys, they were getting the ball very quickly out of their hands on a average basis, and their percentage of when they were getting the ball quickly out of their hands is in the 70 to 80% range. So they threw very infrequently deeper, longer developing plays down the field. For instance, Tom Brady, 85% of his passes he threw within 2.5 seconds, as opposed to only 15% that he held the ball for 2.6 or more seconds in the pocket. So he was getting the ball out of his hands extremely quickly. Now, on the flip side, let's look at some of these guys who were holding on to the ball far more frequently. Teddy Bridgewater, again, that offensive line wasn't great, so he's having to move around in the pocket and try to make things happen, and we obviously saw what happened there. Colin Kaepernick, he held the ball a lot in the pocket, in addition to Johnny Manziel, Tyrod Taylor, and Cam Newton, and Jameis Winston. Now, one thing in particular that those guys have in common are they're younger and they're more mobile in the pocket. So typically these guys will try to scramble around a little bit. Their offensive line breaks down. They are still trying to throw the ball, and they're holding on to it a little bit longer in the pocket. But a couple of guys who stand out in this list that are top 10 guys in terms of holding on to the ball longer than average included Carson Palmer, Aaron Rodgers, and Ben Roethlisberger. None of those guys are young, obviously. All these guys are veteran quarterbacks, but what they were doing is letting longer routes develop down the field on more frequent passing plays. And when those guys were throwing the ball down the field in those situations, holding it for 2.6 seconds or more, all of them delivered passer ratings of over 100. They had pretty strong performances there. And so, two of those guys did win their games, Carson Palmer and Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger did not. But there are some, obviously, offenses that are more designed to trying to hit bigger, deeper plays down the field as opposed to these quick striking offenses that some of those teams at the bottom of this list where they were getting the ball out of their hand quickly. It's just a preference of the coaching staff. It's also a preference of the opponent that you're going up against and what you're going to do there. But certainly, I know the way Bruce Arians coaches love Bruce Arians. It was really interesting, though, to see Carson Palmer up there. I would expected it if he was fully healthy, but just back off of his injury, Arians was still having him hang in the pocket and throw the ball down the field, which is a staple of Bruce Arians' offense. And Carson Palmer was able to get the job done and execute that plan efficiently. So kudos to Carson Palmer for stepping up to do that. And that's how the quarterbacks looked in terms of time in the pocket. Story number 3, new coordinators making an impact, guys. You know by now that I love coaching. I love play calling. I love decision making by the thinkers in the league, and that filters down to how the players perform on the field. So many people focus primarily on the playing of the game, the players, where they are now, which teams they're on, who added new players, how they're going to perform. Not enough was made about the coordinators that moving around who are going to be calling the plays. So I splashed up here on YouTube a graphic. It goes over new offensive coordinators, new defensive coordinators in different places that made a strong impact, a positive impact, and then those that looked bad, in my opinion. So I'm only going to go through a couple of these guys on either categories. The first one, offensively, it looked great, Kyle Shanahan. What he was able to do down in Atlanta with a team that basically only had Julio Jones. A lot of people are thinking Roddy White's getting too old. Where's their tight end anymore? They don't have a great, run game. Their offensive line isn't all that great. He made that offense look tremendous with some of the schematics that he was utilizing. So kudos to Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. Greg Roman in Buffalo. Boy, was I on the anti-Doug Marrone bandwagon after I studied his play calling coming off of last year. I wrote a big article for it for Fox. Went on endlessly about how Doug Marrone just really screwed things up there in Buffalo. I was very high on Greg Roman being able to come in there and utilize more intelligent play calling to his benefit. And guess what? He made Tyrod Taylor look incredible. That offense was very productive and efficient. They made obviously a lot of it had to do with the defense, but that offense looked great. Made that Indianapolis Colts defense look even worse than what it was. Switching over to defenses, certainly I'll jump down the list to a guy who I thought made the biggest impact defensively was Eric Mangini. This is a San Francisco 49ers team, lost a ton of personnel to retirement, to injury. Everybody's thinking this team's going to be nothing. And granted, the Minnesota Vikings offensive line really is having some injury issues and some talent issues right now, but Eric Mangini made that San Francisco 49ers defense look as good as it has in years. Tremendous X's and O's and really impressive there. And of course, I'm not going to exclude the several head coaches who left their teams to go coach other teams and brought on defensive coordinators. Dan Quinn with Richard Smith down in Atlanta. Excellent job against Sam Bradford and that Philadelphia Eagles high-powered offense last night. Rex Ryan, again, mentioning Buffalo with Dennis Thurman. Tremendous job there against Andrew Luck. And then Todd Bowles and Casey Rogers down in New Jersey. The New York Jets, tremendous job there as well. So those guys I would like to highlight in terms of really exceeding expectations. And then talking about some guys that look bad, it's easy to jump down to talk about the Raiders, but let's do it for a second because Jack Del Rio, I just don't get that guy whatsoever, and that's why I have Wade Phillips listed on the defensive improvement. That Denver defense is going to look so much better this year than last year because of Wade Phillips and what he's doing. They certainly looked like it. Once we get into these game breakdowns, I'll go ahead and tell you exactly what that Denver defense was able to do to the Baltimore Ravens, but boy, Jack Del Rio and his staff down in Oakland looked miserable. Keith Butler in Pittsburgh, yeah, I know that you're taking over for a legend in the game, but that defense could not even line up. Forget about playing defense. They could not even line up on defense. They had all offseason to get ready. They know that they're playing the New England Patriots. They have nobody else to prepare for but the New England Patriots on a Thursday with days of rest to get ready for their next opponent in week 2. And he can't even get his defenders to line up and guard Rob Gronkowski out on the perimeter before the snap. Easy for Tom Brady against that defense. And then one last guy I thought was a real disappointment in my opinion was Mark Trestman. He was from Chicago, now with the Baltimore Ravens. Expected much better things from him. I know he has to work with the personnel that he's got, but they're going to need to figure some things out because he was able to make some things work in Chicago, and that offense really wasn't all that great before he got involved with it. So hopefully he's going to be able to do some of the similar things to the Baltimore Ravens and help them improve their offense because it looked pretty bad. All right, guys, that was the time warp, which means we're going back in time. We're looking into our rearview mirror to see what happened last week, why teams won and why they lost. Let's jump right into these games since we've got a bunch of them to cover. First and foremost, defending Super Bowl champ New England Patriots hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of offense in this game, a lot of disappointing defense in this game. We already mentioned how the Steelers' defense was miserable, but let's go over some of the key stats. The New England Patriots converted 64% of their third downs. They were the 4th best team in early down success rate, so they avoided a lot of third downs. And then when they got to third down, 2nd best team in the league this past week at converting them. 26 total first downs converted, 4 of 4 in the red zone. And when you got a quarterback like Tom Brady who's able to complete 78% of his passes for 8.8 yards per attempt and post the 2nd best passer rating of the week at 143, it's going to be very difficult to win that game, especially if you are down on the turnover margin like the Steelers were and you miss field goals. So they missed 2 field goals. They lost that game by 7 points. That was a big difference in the game. From the Pittsburgh Steelers' perspective, offensively, they need to improve. They only converted 47% of their third downs. Ben Roethlisberger had a decent day. He still posted a 93 passer rating, which obviously I'm sure he would like to improve upon that. But the main takeaway from this game was from a rushing perspective. Obviously, the New England Patriots were without LeGarrette Blount, but they could only muster up 3.3 yards per carry against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, which is pretty bad. So they chose to attack more so from the air, even though it was a pretty balanced attack. They got most of their success through the passing game, especially when the Steelers weren't lining up properly. But on the flip side of things, very interesting to note that D'Angelo Williams and the Pittsburgh Steelers run game was able to gain 5.4 yards per carry against this New England Patriots defense. That's a big problem. This defense needs to improve upon that because if you look at that division, you're going to have teams that are going to try to run the ball against you, and they definitely have good defenses at stopping the run, so it's going to be a lot on Tom Brady's arm if the New England Patriots defense doesn't step up. Yards per play, Steelers averaged just over 7. That was 2nd best in the league. A lot of offense, very little defense in this game, and some missed opportunities for the Steelers. Bears and Packers, great game, back and forth game. I think decided by one thing and one thing alone, and that is the quarterback disparity between the Bears and the Packers. But before I get into that, I really want to touch on something that nobody's going to take away from this game who didn't mention it before the game started, except for me to my clients, and that was the Green Bay Packers defense last season ranked 32nd, that is dead last, in early down success rate defense. Obviously, it's a very key metric. And I wrote an article. I also posted information in the annual football publication that I put out this summer about you cannot discount the Green Bay Packers season last year attributable to Aaron Rodgers' brilliance, because without Aaron Rodgers, they would have done nothing with that defense. It was very bad. It just got glossed over by how great Aaron Rodgers performed. Once again, though, he was able to perform well enough to lead this team to victory. But let's look at that defense. The Bears gained 65% conversions on third down. That was the best of any team in the league. They also gained 5.7 yards per carry running the football. That was second best of any team in the league. They only punted one time all game. So when you've got a defense like the Green Bay Packers that's allowing the Bears to just move up and down the field like that on them, it's a big problem, particularly because there's so many question marks about these Bears coming into the season. Will they have, obviously will Alshon Jeffrey be able to play? Will Eddie Royal be able to play? Both those guys were injured. Both those guys gutted it out and played. And they have a new offense, new head coach, John Fox. What is this team going to do? And they just go through the Green Bay Packers like a knife through butter week one. So that's a problem. The reason that they struggled to win this game was Jay Cutler. He only completed 50% of his passes. That was the second worst. Only Jameis Winston was worse than him last week. His passer rating was 66. That was 27th. So Jay Cutler, he also threw an interception, and that basically cost him this game. I have no doubt about it that but for Jay Cutler not performing up to his standards, that the Bears cover, if not win this game outright. It was that good of a performance by that offense, except for what Jay Cutler did with his completion percentage and that interception. The Packers, tremendous. Once again, what can you say about Aaron Rodgers? He led that team down into the red zone 5 times, scored 4 touchdowns on the Bears in the red zone. Without Jordy Nelson, with Randall Cobb, who can't lift his arm above his shoulder. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is just absolutely ridiculous once again this season. But those are my main takeaways from that game. All right, the Texans versus the Chiefs. My main thing on this game related to the Chiefs running game, it was my only concern about this game whatsoever. I was on the Chiefs, obviously, was that their run defense last season was not very good. And without Arian Foster, the Texans still were able to average 4.7 yards per attempt. So this is definitely something to track moving forward, because a lot of people saw the score, saw the Chiefs bust out 21-point lead in this game, up by 18 points at halftime, and thought, wow, this defense is playing lights out. And they did have a tremendous game in the passing side of things. But on the rushing side of things, the Texans, they weren't able to be quite as balanced as they would have liked to be. Of course, 47 passing attempts and only 21 rushing attempts. But those rushing attempts were pretty successful. So the Chiefs need to button that up. And then on the flip side, the Chiefs struggled to run the football. Only 3 yards per rush for the Chiefs. That was 27th in the league. It's actually the first time as a Chief that Alex Smith was able to help lead his team to a victory when the running game produced less than 3.25 yards per attempt. So it was very good for the Chiefs from a defensive perspective and from an Alex Smith passing perspective. He recorded a 117 passer rating. The defense got 5 sacks on the Houston Texans quarterbacks, but neither of these teams very good offensively in general. 7 punts by each team. They ranked 29th and 28th in terms of third down conversions. So a lot of defense in this game, and some big plays through the passing game with Kelsey, the Chiefs tight end. That's the main takeaway here. But the Chiefs, if they're going to stand any shot, need to really button up their run defense and figure out how to get that fixed moving forward. Jumping down to the Jets and the Browns game, this is a game that the Jets. I was on Chris Ivory in Daily Fantasy. I thought he would probably produce a good game. And one of the interesting things that I was taking away from this game when I was breaking it down and it ended up coming to fruition was the fact that with Brandon Marshall out there, a lot of people were concerned, well, is he going to take away opportunities for Chris Ivory? And to an extent, yes. But what I said to the clients is that this is going to give the Jets more opportunities to get down into the red zone because they have a better quarterback and a better wide receiver than they had last year. That's just going to produce more chances. So while he may not get as many carries and touches over the course of the 80 yards or 60 yards up into the opponent's red zone, once they get there, he's going to get touches. And of course, they got into the Browns red zone 6 times. That was the big difference in this game. Browns only made 2 trips into the Jets red zone. Jets made 6 trips into the Browns red zone, converted 4 of those in 4 touchdowns. When you look at some of the metrics, the Jets ran for 4.3 yards per carry, a pretty dominating performance overall. But keep in mind, the Browns only punted twice, so there were a lot of big plays, but 5 turnovers from the Browns, 4 fumbles lost, 1 interception. They'd obviously be punting the ball more than twice if they didn't have all those turnovers, but a very dominant performance overall by the Jets, well deserving of a win in that game. Now moving on to the Bills versus the Colts. This was a game we were on the Bills. Obviously a pretty easy game for us. If you had the Bills like we did, they coasted to a 24-point lead. We're up by 17 at the half. Tyrod Taylor, what can you say about this kid? He only threw 19 passes. The Bills only had 19 passes, but completed 74% of them for 10.3 yards per attempt, second most yards per attempt of anyone. Actually, Marcus Mariota had the number 1 ranking there, but 124 passer rating for Tyrod Taylor in the game. They gained 6.2 yards per play against this Colts defense, so a very strong offensive performance, but pretty low volume. They didn't even need to run a ton of plays. They ended up running 36 times just because they had such a big dominant lead in the game. But when you look at the Indianapolis Colts, this is a team, they only converted 53% of their third downs, and Andrew Luck, 53% conversions in his passing, 28th in yards per attempt. They only passed for 4.9 yards per attempt, 63 passer rating, also 28th in the league. So definite concerns for the Indianapolis Colts offense, but this Bills defense, strong ball hawking, just very dynamic, got 3 turnovers, didn't give the ball up at all. That's kind of what I was alluding to when I was suggesting Tyrod Taylor. I just felt like he was going to be able to maintain control in this game, and the coaches weren't going to ask him to hang in the pocket and do anything too crazy. Use his wheels, get out of trouble, just avoid the negative plays. Sure enough, what happened? This is one of the reasons I was recommending on fantasy. The Colts sacked him no times, and he had no turnovers. So 2 big things, use his wheels to get out of trouble. Excellent game from Tyrod Taylor. Moving down to the Redskins and Dolphins. This game, I think, surprised a lot of people, especially when the Washington Redskins led by 3 after the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter, only to lose that lead and let the Miami Dolphins back into the game. People are just down on the Redskins defense. I was trying to point that out when I was suggesting to avoid Lamar Miller in this game. As a team, the Miami Dolphins only ran for 74 yards at 4.1 yards per carry. Meanwhile, the Dolphins' defense was supposed to be their strong suit, but they let this Washington Redskins offense run for 161 yards at 4.4 yards per carry. So those are not very good numbers. Defensively, the Miami Dolphins are going to really have to step up their defense. Ryan Tannehill, not a very good performance either, even against this somewhat depleted, banged-up Washington Redskins secondary. Only completed 65% of his passes. That was 18th in the league for 5.4 yards per carry, 24th in the league, and an 88 passer rating. So Ryan Tannehill needs to step it up. The run defense for the Dolphins need to step it up if they want to be a contender. They won this game, but the reality was it was a very, very even game. The Dolphins had 1 extra turnover that they got from the Redskins, so they were +1 in the turnover margin. That made obviously an impact in the final score. But the Redskins, a lot of penalties as well. The Redskins, think about this. The Redskins had the ball for 37, almost 38 minutes in this game. That was the second most of any team in the NFL. The Dolphins only had it for 22 minutes. So there's the largest disparity, second largest disparity, but for the Chargers that we're going to be talking about in a minute. Dolphins really need to step things up. The Jags at the Panthers, this was a game I was on the under. That was going to be lower scoring. As a result, I thought the Jaguars stood a good shot at possibly pulling this game out outright, but instead of doing that, I took a little bit safer route and teased them. Unfortunately, for a missed extra point, that teaser lost. But this is a game where I think it just put the Panthers' offensive struggles on display for us. Unfortunately, a lot of people just look at the final score, and that's good for us because they're going to think that the Panthers dominated this game and really shut the Jaguars down and won 20-9, but it couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at the actual statistics in the game, the Jaguars actually had more yards per play than did the Carolina Panthers. Carolina only had 3.9 yards per play. Jaguars had more than that. That was 30th in the league, by the way. They only ran for 3.0 yards per carry. That was 28th in the league. They ended up passing the football almost as much as they ran it because they just couldn't run it well enough. It ended up being a little bit of a problem when Cam Newton threw an interception. I thought they were passing the ball too much considering the fact that they don't have very good weapons out there. At any rate, they threw Cam Newton threw 58% completions for 5.1 yards per attempt and a 69 passer rating. All of those were 24th or worst when you look at their ranking compared to the rest of the league. And another big takeaway, Carolina only had 17 first downs, went to third down 17 times. That was a very bad early down success rate. Ended up being 28th in the league out of the 32 teams that played. They got their edge in this game by turnovers and return touchdown. They also sacked Blake Bortles 5 times. So those numbers put together is what got them the win. They had a pick six. Okay, they were only up by 1 at halftime. They got a pick six in the second half. They were +2 in turnover margin. And so for those reasons, that's why they won this game. I have no doubt in my mind that they play this game more often and Blake Bortles gets a little bit more comfortable, that the Jaguars don't stand a shot to win a large number of those games against the Carolina Panthers. So please don't think that the Jaguars are completely miserable. They've got a lot of work to do, but the Carolina Panthers are certainly not, in my opinion, at least not right now, the best team in the NFC South. The Falcons looked pretty good last night. Moving on to the Rams and Seahawks. When you look at the Seahawks, the one thing that surprised me with them was what they did in their passing game. They came up and stuffed the run. They held the Rams to only 2.9 yards per carry, third worst in the league last week. But they allowed the third most yards per attempt for Nick Foles and the Rams. 10.2 yards per attempt and 67% completions on those deep passes. Tremendous effort from Nick Foles to get the Rams in scoring position to convert as much as they needed to. They got into the red zone 4 times, converted 2 for touchdowns and made 2 field goals. They also defensively really stepped it up. 6 sacks on Russell Wilson. They held the Seahawks to the 27th early down success rate in the league last week. Only converted 25% of their red zone trips. And Russell Wilson, this is where some of the passing numbers might look a little bit, you could misread them. He completed 78% of his passes, but they were all close to the line of scrimmage to avoid the pressure, to avoid sacks. So he only averaged 5.3 yards per attempt. That was 25th in the league. The Rams actually lost the time of possession battle pretty badly. The Seahawks had it for 37 minutes in the game. But when you look at the total yards per play, Seattle's offense overall, because of those short completions and because they couldn't really run the ball effectively, only gained 4.3 yards per play, 26th in the league. Cardinals and the Saints, this was a game that featured a lot of high potent offense from the Arizona Cardinals. Second best early down success rate. They achieved 25 first downs, only went to third down 10 times. They were 3 of 3 in the red zone, 2 of 2 in goal-to-go situations. As I mentioned earlier, Carson Palmer, his passing completion percentage is not going to be quite as high because he's throwing the ball deeper down the field. He averaged 9.6 yards per attempt. That was the 4th best, and 123 passer rating on this depleted New Orleans Saints secondary. So that's something to keep an eye on. In addition, focus on the fact that the Arizona Cardinals, who were not really a great running team at all last year, who are not known for being a great running team, averaged 4.8 yards per carry. I know they're going to be without Andre Ellington. I hope that David Johnson gets a little bit more work as a running back because I think he's better than Chris Johnson at this stage in their careers. But Arizona Cardinals, 7.5 yards per play, the best in the NFL. When you look at the Saints, they struggled offensively against this Rams defense, only 2.7 yards per rush. That was the league's worst last week. And they did get into the red zone 4 times, but could only convert 1 of them for touchdowns. And the 28th rated early down success rate in the league. So 18 first downs, but went to third down 18 times. Not very good statistics. But I want to jump to this Chargers-Lions game because I want to talk for a minute here about efficiency and about big plays. One team was highly efficient. One team made a ton of big plays. And it just goes to show you that big plays are dangerous. They could potentially win games. But the key standout, key takeaway that I want you to take away from this game, the Detroit Lions defense. Here's the thing. The San Diego Chargers offense, 28 first downs, only 11 trips to third down. That was the best early down success rate of any team. In those 11 times when they were forced to third down, they still converted 55% of them. Where was this Detroit Lions defense? They were nowhere to be found. Phillip Rivers, 35 of 42 for 83% completions. That was the best in the NFL. 9.2 yards per attempt. That was the 5th best in the NFL. So very strong numbers from him, particularly because though they were trailing for most of the game, were the Chargers, they could only run for 3.2 yards per carry. So the Detroit Lions stepped it up defensively against the run, which they were known for last season as well, but they could not get anything done in that secondary to defend the San Diego Chargers and Phillip Rivers. And that's what won the game for the Chargers. They were able to maintain the ball and convert on third downs and avoid third downs. They had the ball for 38 minutes, just over 38 minutes. That was the most of any team in the league. Lions only had the ball for 21.8 minutes. That was the league's least. Now, the Lions had a ton of big plays, big touchdowns. They only actually got into the red zone one time because they were scoring from distances. But the Chargers got into the Lions red zone 7 times. 7. Most of any team in the league last week. They converted 4 of them for touchdowns. So, all in all, Detroit Lions need to work on their secondary. That defense is a problem. And the Chargers defense, they've got to figure out a way to avoid some of these big plays they're allowing. I'm sure there's a lot of excitement right now for Abdullah and the Lions offense, but they need to be concerned about that secondary. And in terms of the Chargers, same thing. That offense looked good, but giving up all those big plays is definitely a problem. This game saw 33-28 final score. Very high scoring game there. All right, let's finish out this whole slate of games here. The Titans and the Bucks, just a tremendous debut from Marcus Mariota and the Tennessee Titans. 81% completions, 11.6 yards per attempt, 154 passer rating. Just ridiculous statistics there. Very efficient in the red zone as well, 4 of 4. This is a team that obviously caught the Bucks by surprise. There's no doubt about that. With the play calling, with the scheme that Ken Wisenhunt came up with to utilize the strengths of Marcus Mariota, just absolutely ridiculous. The trick is going to be moving forward. Obviously, do the Bucks have defensive problems? Yes, they do. How much of the Titans' success was because of those problems? That remains to be seen. In addition, there's always adjustments that get made after week 1. How much are the opponents that he's going to face in the future going to learn from the tape of this game and figure out different ways and strategies to try to attack the game plan that they're going to put in there for Marcus Mariota? So that's going to be interesting to see how that develops over the next coming weeks. The Bucks got to figure out a better way to give Jameis Winston more protection, make him a little bit more comfortable. He only completed 48% passes. That was 32nd in the league. That was the worst, obviously. And they had 12 penalties. That was the most in the league. So the Bucks have got to clean it up in a lot of areas to have any hope this season. And meanwhile, the Titans are a team that's full of hope with their star in Marcus Mariota. Moving to the Raiders and the Bengals. This strange anomaly for the Raiders continues here with their red zone conversions. They went 2 of 2 in the red zone. They are the team last year that basically finished as one of the best teams in terms of red zone conversion percentage. They just hardly ever get down there because they're not that good, but they really make it count when they do get down there, which really is going to draw some attention if this continues for the totals, because they're going to get 1 or 2 trips down there and score, and then that's going to send games over the total just by that alone. I was on the Titans in the earlier game. We didn't have anything on this Raiders and Bengals game from a betting perspective, although I did like the running back for the Bengals in this one, and of course he did very well. They got down to the red zone 6 times. They scored 4 touchdowns. Great performance offensively and defensively from the Bengals. Speaking of great defensive performances, the Broncos and the Ravens, this was a game where we were on the under and did not disappoint. Obviously an easy one there, but when you look at the yards per play, I'm not talking about yards per rush. I'm talking about yards per play. 3.04 yards per play for the Ravens, 3.17 yards per play for the Broncos. Both of those dead last in the league. When you look at early down success rate, Broncos, 16 first downs, had to go to third down 18 times. Ravens, 11 first downs, had to go to third down 13 times. Terrible numbers. Both of those dead last in the league in early down success rate as well. Both teams only made 1 trip to their opponent's red zone in the whole game. The Broncos, though, dominated from a time of possession, 37 minutes to less than 23. But neither team could run the ball, neither team could throw the ball. And now the Ravens are going to be without Suggs for the rest of the year. So that's going to be a big problem. That offense is going to have to step it up if they're going to win some games. And they just really didn't look capable of doing that. So great takeaways if you're the Broncos defense. Positive takeaways for the Ravens defense, but concern about the Suggs injury. Both offenses, some serious concerns there. Speaking about offense, Dallas Cowboys offense, this is an offense where I wondered, how is this going to work without a strong run game? And it basically almost backfired. Week 1, They only rushed for 3.5 yards per attempt, only 80 total rushing yards. The lowest number that they had all last year was above 80 yards. So they did not do well from a running perspective. And because of that, it really almost came back to bite them because of some of these turnovers. When you have turnovers and you can't control time of possession through the ground, it's going to be a problem. Now, they compensated this week by doing it through the air. 36 completions, 45 attempts. That's 80% for Tony Romo. Very strong numbers, third best in the NFL. And they were very efficient on early down success rate, third best. Very efficient in third downs, 55% conversions. That was the fourth best. So they maintained their efficiency when it counted. They controlled the ball from a passing perspective, but they're going to need to figure out how to run the ball, especially because now they're going to be without Dez Bryant for a while. From the Giants' perspective, struggles all around. I mean, this defense, I think, played better than what I expected them to play. But the offense, 56% completions from Eli Manning, 5.3 yards per attempt. Both of those not very good numbers. He's got to improve big time. Next up for the Cowboys is the Eagles, and the Eagles are going to be in desperation mode after that game where they really just were down by 17 points at halftime, came back, roared back in the third quarter and looked great, but by looking great, they still weren't passing the ball down the field very much. Sam Bradford, 69% completions, but only 6.5 yards per attempt. That was 17th in the NFL. Everything was close to the line of scrimmage. They were not running enough play action, in my opinion, and they were not running the football as much as they needed to really set up very much in the pass game to go downfield. But give credit where it's due. That defense for the Atlanta Falcons played extremely well. That was part of the reason why the Eagles couldn't do as good as they wanted to do there from an offensive perspective, from a balance perspective. I just hope Chip Kelly steps it up from a play action role to get back to the level he was at a minimum from last season. Because when the Eagles got into the red zone, they were strong. 3 conversions and 4 trips. They were better in an early down success rate, more first downs than the Atlanta Falcons. So good numbers overall from there. They rushed for better yards per rush than did the Atlanta Falcons. They just hardly ran the ball at all. So, great effort from the Falcons. Some hope for the Eagles. It's not as bad as it seems, but they're going to need to step it up. And then speaking of a team that doesn't look like it's got much hope, the last game, the Vikings against the 49ers. Wow, I mean, Teddy Bridgewater, this whole Vikings defense, those are my 2 takeaways from this game. The Minnesota Vikings only converted 11% of their third downs. I'm surprised to see the numbers that Teddy Bridgewater actually completed 72% of his passes. It looked way worse than that when you were watching it last night. Lots of errant throws, lots of throws that weren't even close at all. They were able to rush for 4.2 yards per carry, but they only ran it 17 times. Even though it was still a 7-point game at halftime, they were down only by 10 points entering the fourth quarter. They were just having Bridgewater throw it a lot, and that was a problem because that offensive line was not protecting. The San Francisco 49ers, Eric Mangini-led defense was getting all over the Minnesota Vikings offensive line in the backfield constantly. Bridgewater was under duress. It's going to be hard to convert passes when you're faced with that type of pressure. So you could take a little bit off of Bridgewater for that, but he's got to step it up. He's got to improve. Norv Turner's got to figure something out, how to make that offense work. And more importantly, Mike Zimmer and that defense, you've got to figure out how to prevent 230 rushing yards and 5.9 yards per attempt, which is what the 49ers ran all over the Vikings for. Very impressive performance from the 49ers. Lots of work for the Minnesota Vikings, who had big aspirations coming into this season.
All right, guys, quick run through of these injuries. Andre Ellington, Cardinals running back, out with a knee injury, possible return week 4. Chris Johnson, and hopefully more David Johnson than Bruce Arians is alluding to right now, will be spelling Andre Ellington. Terrell Suggs, we mentioned, out for the season with an Achilles tear. Eugene Monroe, their offensive tackle, suffered a concussion. He's week to week. The Bills could be facing off with the New England Patriots without Corey Graham, their DB. He was also injured in a concussion, as was the Panthers' Luke Kuechly, who's listed as week to week. Darrell Williams, the Panthers' offensive tackle, he injured his knee. He's out 2 to 4 weeks. Big injury for Dallas was Randy Gregory and Dez Bryant. Dez, obviously, he's going to be out for some time now with a broken bone in his foot, and Randy Gregory is out 4 to 6 weeks. Their defensive lineman, pass rusher extraordinaire, with an ankle injury. T.Y. Hilton for the Colts. He could miss time. We're not sure what his status is right now on Tuesday, but he injured his knee. The Jaguars' Luke Joeckel injured his ankle. He was in and out of the game last week against the Carolina Panthers. The Saints' Raphael Bush, DB, he's hurt his pec, and he could miss some time. Their secondary is already a problem, so that's not good. Speaking of secondaries that are a problem, the Raiders without DJ Hayden and Charles Woodson potentially for some time now. Both of them are players from their secondary, so that could be a big issue for their secondary. Another team in that division, the San Diego Chargers, lost DJ Fluker for 4 to 6 weeks. He's their big road grader offensive tackle, so that's something to talk about for sure. San Francisco 49ers, Reggie Bush, running back week to week. Trumaine Johnson and Trey Mason, both of the Rams, they both suffered injuries. One a concussion, one a hammy day to day. Delaney Walker injured his hand. We're not sure on his status. And for the Redskins, big injury is Deshaun Jackson with his hamstring. He is listed as week to week right now. That will wrap up the week 2 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis podcast, but I will be back most likely later this week to go over some of the key metrics and analytics from the NFLproject.com website, where we can get a better forecast as to where teams currently stand after week 1 in terms of odds and playoff seedings, as well as projecting which teams need these games the most in terms of helping their futures. So that'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll be able to get that one in on Thursday. See you then.
This is gonna be a fun ride. This is gonna be a fun ride.
Everybody one clap.
I'm gonna play when I wanna play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody one clap. One clap. One clap. One clap.